To order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd. Alderman Vaccaro. Present. Alderman Cone. Alderman Arnowitz.
Here.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Present.
Alderman Kotar.
Here.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Present.
Alderman Muhammad.
Present.
Alderwoman Boyd. Chairman Kennedy.
Here.
President Reed. 7 present. You have a quorum.
I'm here.
I didn't hear you.
You didn't go back around.
Alderman Boyd.
Present.
8 present. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I was just informed before we called the meeting to order today that the PA system is not working. So we'll have to speak up here today. It is our pleasure today to have the Public Safety Committee meeting. Welcome both our new Public Safety Director and the new Police Commissioner of the City of St. Louis. We wanted to take this opportunity to hear your vision that you're in these new positions, what direction you feel to take the city in as it relates to public safety, and then for you to hear from the committee as to our ideas and thoughts about the needs in our community, our particular areas, and how we see things moving forward in the future. We know that this is a shared governance process in the city between the legislative branch and the executive branch of government. And so these kinds of connections, we feel, strengthen that relationship and help us all move in a unified direction. We know sometimes we have a difference of opinion, but dialogue gives us the ability to find some common ground so that we can work together in the future. This is a committee meeting just of the committee. We're not holding public testimony here today. We do plan on some other future meetings where we may have public testimony as well. The way it's structured, I'd like to bring up the Public Safety Director first. He will present his thoughts and ideas, then bring up the new Police Commissioner, and then begin to ask questions at that point. Do I need to shout louder? No, sir. Okay. Just want to make sure that people can hear us. So when you recognize that the microphones are not working, and so that means we're really going to speak. So we'd like to welcome our new Public Safety Director, Judge Edwards, who has been here as of November?
As of November the 6th. Thank you very much. Good morning, Chairperson Kennedy, Alderman. Thank you very much. I am still excited to be your Public Safety Director. Let me initially say that public safety in the city of St. Louis is not just my responsibility or our commissioner's responsibility, as exceptional as he might be. Public safety is the responsibility of all of us and all of our citizens. My job, as I see it, is to direct policy, to ensure that public safety, as we will know it in the city of St. Louis, will be transparent, firstly, and that it will be accountable to the citizens. In my mind, our police department, our jails, our fire department are all entities that belong to the citizens of the city of St. Louis. So I welcome these types of meetings. I welcome your hardest questions. I welcome you to challenge us on every single facet of public safety. So if there's something on your mind, I certainly invite you to inquire. We are going to do things differently in the city of St. Louis. I believe that with respect to policing, we have to police at every single level in the city of St. Louis in order to bring crime down. What I mean by that is that we are going to have to police at the lowest level in traffic violations. We're going to have to police with respect to vagrancies, with respect to all of those low-level ordinance offenses in order to be able to to handle the bigger issues. What I mean by that, for example, if vehicles are speeding on our streets with temp tags, we ought to stop that. We haven't done that in a long time. And I suspect that if we start to pull those types of cars over, we will find that in many instances they're stolen. We'll find weapons inside of those cars. And so it's that I think that we have to be cognizant of. We have to be concerned about the big things, but we have to be just as concerned about the little things all over our city. We know that 67% of the serious crimes in the city of St. Louis occur in a rectangle. Goodfellow on the west, Vanderveer on the east, Dr. Martin Luther King on the south, West Florissant, Broadway on the north. I believe that it is imperative that we address crime where it exists. And so our plan is to make an adjustment, if you will, of the man and women power that we have inside of the police department and put them in places where they're needed, not to the detriment of other parts of our city. We understand that we have to police differently, more equitably. We have to police in a way that it makes good sense. And so, for example, if we have a bomb squad, I don't need those people that are sitting on our bomb squad seated in headquarters waiting for a call to address a bomb. I don't need a SWAT team at headquarters waiting on a call for a SWAT team. I don't need a bunch of folk that are specialized waiting for their name to be called. In my mind, you're a cop. You're a cop every single day. So if you are a cop, then you ought to do policing. So I don't want you at headquarters. I'm encouraged by our chief. Encouraged that he understands that he has to engage the community. We will meet with every single alderperson there is to talk about what's going on in their respective wards, because we want to know that. So I expect our commanders to engage the public. At the same time, I expect our police officers to engage in community policing. See, in my mind, you have to get out of the car. You can't drive up and down a street all day long and not know the names of anybody on that block. That's important to me. It's also important to me that we all change the narrative in our city. We have to be willing to participate with the police. I understand that there has always been a trust gap. It's my job to close that trust gap. It's my job to make sure that the citizens understand that the police officers are working for them, working with them. So to that end, we respect the law. We respect that citizens have a right to protest. We respect the rule of law. We respect the First Amendment. And we accept the federal judge's order that there should not be kettling. It's wrong and it's illegal. I understand that. So for the first time, the Public Safety Office has someone that is uniquely qualified. For 25 years, I've addressed crime in the city of St. Louis from the other side of the bench. I understand rehabilitation, deterrence, retribution, and incapacitation. I certainly believe that our judges are willing to listen to my concerns about crime. But more importantly, I understand that crime is not limited just to the city of St. Louis. So to that point, we've reached out to our federal partners. We've asked the FBI, the ATF, the U.S. Marshal, the State Highway Patrol, St. Louis County, and East St. Louis to come to the middle with us to address crime. We put together a multi-jurisdictional carjacking collaborative where all of these entities are working on carjackings. We're having some success. We will have success in the city of St. Louis as it relates to crime. I have 8 other departments, if you will. The fire department. We'll take a look at the fire department. And before I pivot away from the police department, just for your information, we are down 124 police officers in the city of St. Louis. We have 3 academy classes at this time. We need to recruit better. We need to recruit folk that love our city and love law enforcement. So I don't care whether you black, white, green, gay, or lesbian. We need people that care about our city and is willing to police. I know that the unrest has put a great burden on overtime in our city. I think that we could have done that better. I reviewed the comptroller's audit of the city of St. Louis as it relates to overtime pay to police officers from the 2015 fiscal year. I reviewed the report that was provided in May, I believe on May 10th of 2017. I believe that because of the vacancies that existed on our police department, those funds should have been transferred from those vacancies and overtime paid out of those vacancies, as opposed to having to reach into some type or some other form of overtime pay. With respect to our fire department, I'm concerned with diversity in our fire department. We need to address diversity in our fire department. I had the opportunity to welcome new recruits about 2 weeks ago. 27 new recruits, no women, and 4 African Americans. We can recruit better. We will recruit better. With respect to corrections, my biggest problem with corrections is our budget. We pay $80 a day to house pretrial inmates. We are reimbursed $22.50 from the state of Missouri. We only get paid if there is a conviction of a defendant. So an individual may be in our facility for 24 months, 36 months awaiting trial. We're spending $80 every day for that person. Unless that person has been convicted, we don't get paid the $22.58. We need legislation to help us with that. If a person is put on probation, receive a suspended imposition of sentence, the case is dismissed, or if the individual is found not guilty, we get no money. Unfortunately, this is a system that incentivizes convictions. We've worked extremely hard to make sure that there are no persons seated in the Justice Center or at the medium security institution awaiting trial for a city ordinance offense. I'm happy to say we have none of those folk in our facility. Nor do we have people in our facility that are waiting for technical probation violations. The judges have worked extremely close with us to ensure that those folk are no longer housed in our jails. So we will work on police staffing. We will work on overtime. But more importantly, we will work on reducing crime. I'm not naive enough to believe that Commissioner Hayden and I alone will reduce crime. This issue has been an issue for many, many years. And the fact that we are here does not automatically mean that crime will be reduced. Certainly, I have a great affection in our city for youth. Our youth crime, or offenses, to be more technically correct, they're up a little. We have to address that. We have to understand that it doesn't matter what the court system does with respect to juveniles. If a juvenile is adjudicated and sent off to the Division of Youth Services, which is our state facility, at 12 or 13 years, we lock that child up for 5 years. Statutorily, necessarily, and under the law, that kid is returned back to the city of St. Louis when that child turns 18 years old. It begs the question, what have we done? There are things that we can do better. I understand all of the problems with delinquency and crime. I understand poverty. I understand housing, lack of economic opportunity. I understand that all of those things play a role. I would love to be able to tell the Board of Aldermen my plan for 10 years. I'd love to be able to do that. I would love to be able to tell you that I can guarantee you that we will reduce crime in a great way. But you can help me do that. I understand you guys get a lot of money. I don't know a lot about this process yet, and I'm sure you're going to teach me about this process. I understand you guys get a lot of money for every ward every year. Why don't you give me all that money that you receive in your ward? Will give me an opportunity to do the things that we need to do. I don't mind being accountable to anyone with respect to what we're expected to do here. Make me accountable. The buck stops with me. I accept that. Make me accountable, but also give me the resources so I have the ability to do my job. So I invite you to, is it $8 million? I invite you to give it to me and allow me to utilize those funds, Mr. Chairman.
There's no money. We wish.
I'll invite Commissioner Hayden to come up, and after he's had an opportunity to introduce himself to you. But I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that when going through this process, I've always said that I wanted the best person for the job, somebody that was culturally competent and that loved our city. See, I took this job because I said I loved our city. And I know he loved our city, and he's bright. Washington University graduate with a mathematical or math degree. I can't even say it. With a math degree. And so I didn't ask him whether he knew that the square root of 2 was 1.414, the square root of 3 was 1.73267. I didn't ask him that. I didn't test him on that. But I figure if he got through Washington University, somebody must have asked that question. Then he received a management degree from Fontbonne University, a master's. He's about a year away from earning a law degree from St. Louis University's Law School. Intellectually, he's well qualified. He has the right passion, and he has the right commitment to be our commissioner. That I can assure you. So it's my pleasure to introduce the commissioner for the city of St. Louis, John Hayden.
If you would address, there's no money coming to our wards like that. Somebody get you a bill of goods. We'll talk about it. If you would go ahead and give us your comments. I was given some other instructions about the microphone, that we should speak into them for the TV camera, for the taping. But they're not working as a PA system, so we will have to speak up.
Very good.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. I'm certainly humbled by the judge's introduction, and certainly to all the persons here. Good morning.
Good morning.
So for the past 5 years, from January 2013 up until a couple of weeks ago, I was in some capacity in the North Patrol Division. When I first got there, somebody already made reference to the fact that we went to 6 districts in 2014, but in 2013, when I first got there, we still had 9, and I was the commander of the 8th district. And then in 2014, when we merged the districts and had only 6, I was the commander of the 5th district, which was a combination of districts 6 and 7 and a part of 8, and matter of fact, and then add a little bit of 9. And so for the past 5 years, I've been where the highest volume of violent crime has occurred. And so from that, and like I said, I've been to, and many of you know that, and I've seen many of you at some of those scenes, and so I'm very familiar with our most challenging neighborhoods, some of our most challenging crime-ridden areas in our city. And so from that knowledge base, I was able to determine that it's certainly not the whole of North St. Louis that is very violent, but it is actually, if you use ShotSpot or any other indicator, it would show you that the vast majority of our violent crime, of course, happens in 2 districts. It happens in districts 5 and 6. And so the judge already mentioned that 67% of those 205 homicides happen in just 2 districts. And then 50% of all violent crime happens in just 2 districts. And so having that experience and having that knowledge, what I was able to determine is that the vast majority of that violence occurs between Goodfellow on the west, Vanderbilt on the east, Dr. King on the south, and West Florissant on the north. Now, occasionally, from year to year, sometimes that might get a little wider, north and west, or a little, in other words, it kind of morphs sometimes. But that major rectangle, if you will, is always going to be a mainstay for violent crime. And so, what I've decided to do, and what I've decided to do in the best interest to tackle that, would be to put a lot of our supplemental resources into those areas. And if you look at that, that's even that rectangle is quite a bit of square mileage. And so a lot of the multiple shootings, a lot of times when you see on the news 2 or 3 people shot at the same time, 4 people shot at the same time, a lot of that is connected to drug activity. And so within that rectangle, we will be focusing on places that have been notorious for kind of open drug sales. So that's kind of the plan in a nutshell. And so the resources that will be, the available resources that I have, of course, will be the Mobile Reserve Unit, the Special Operations Unit, and the Violent Crime Unit. And so we'll be up there. That's our enforcement piece. The non-enforcement piece, of course, is and you've heard this term many times, but I'll kind of explain to you what I mean by it, is that when you talk about community policing, and the judge alluded to it earlier, hey, when you talk about going into schools and trying to change some of the mindsets of kids that think that the only way that they can make money is through drug sales, when you talk about being heavily involved in some of the community meetings and having close relationships with the older persons, you begin to realize that over time, when we've been laser focused on crime statistics, that I think crime statistics kind of talk at folks as opposed to talking to people. And so a lot of times I could, for example, I could say that I might come to Alderman Muhammad's meeting and say, hey, the robberies have gone down in the Penrose neighborhood. But if they're still happening and he's still getting phone calls from people that are saying, well, yeah, that's, I kind of get the whole statistical thing, but at the end of the day, I have constituents that are complaining about this street right now. And that's what I mean by that. And so when you get into the neighborhoods, when you get a chance to talk to people, I think that we have not, as the judge already mentioned, we have not been as personally engaged with a lot of the citizens. And so many of you have seen my mobile office, which I did, of course, in North St. Louis, but I'm making preparations to take that concept citywide. And so I'll be at a lot of neighborhood meetings. I'll be at a lot of, just on a lot of streets. And so when I hear from any one of you about a certain area or a certain street, you'll see my mobile office there, actually engaging with neighbors, actually constituents of yours actually being able to come to talk to me. So I really plan to, you say the inside, inside job. I plan on being quite a bit engaged, and of course my commanders will be following me in that light. And so as I come to a community meeting, or if I come to a certain street, the commanders will be there with me, and I'll bring a team of community outreach officers. They'll bring the team of community outreach officers that they have, and we'll all be there together. Is basically what I'm saying. And so that's kind of that. So that's the enforcement piece. The non-enforcement piece is, of course, many of you are familiar with Captain Perry Johnson. I plan on spending a lot of time with him in numerous community engagement programs. Just to mention, the school piece is just one, but all of the events, whether it be the ice cream truck, will be there. We'll just be a lot more community engaged. And like I said, it just comes from kind of how I was doing it when I was in North Patrol, and a lot of those ideas and concepts can now go citywide. So that's kind of a nutshell. And the last part that I'll mention about the crime plan, if you will, is that hey, and like I said, I've actually talked to many of you about this. Hey, one thing that when you talk about the surveillance availability in the Central West End, of course we all know that's paid for through a special taxing district. But the end game though is the fact that when you have a robbery on Euclid in Maryland, you'll have a picture of somebody. You'll be able to see what the person was driving, what car they were driving, or what they were wearing. A lot of times in North St. Louis, we didn't have that. And so I've talked to my intelligence division, and so a lot of that effort will be in expanding our surveillance system in some of the most crime-ridden areas. For example, Natural Bridge and Goodfellow. There's a mobile store there, mobile gas station. I mean, it's a lot of violent activity that happens right there. And so a lot of our pole cameras, our LPR cameras, will be put in strategic places in order to start bringing some of that technology to North St. Louis. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell. And certainly I'm able to answer any questions you might have of me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then. We can open it up now for questions from members of the committee. We normally go by seniority, so we'll take it that way.
I thought you meant seniority between us.
From either one of
us. This is my boss, so seniority is here, I understand.
Alderman Boyd, any questions?
Sure, absolutely. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm excited about this opportunity for the City of St. Louis with you, Judge Edwards, and Commissioner Police Chief Hayton. Judge, you talk about a lot of good stuff. And I'm going to just kind of go down the list and ask you a few questions about some of the stuff you talked about. Certainly, I appreciate being able to do things differently because what we've been doing has not been working, has not been as effective. I certainly appreciate what you said about the low-level ordinances because the constituents I represent, they do care about the fact that people run stop signs and people ride around on temp tags for 2 years and it just seems like nothing happens. I'm eager to see the rollout of the new initiative and pretty much that large hotspot area. Do you know when you guys may start that particular initiative?
Yes, sir. So already I mentioned Special Ops, Mobile Reserve, Anti-Crime, they are already patrolling in those areas. That was something I was able to do right away.
Okay.
Is to change the patrol plan to have the predominance of their time spent in that area. Yes, sir.
And also, Alderman Boyd, the federal government, the FBI is already helping us in that area. The U.S. Marshals are helping us. The ATF are already helping us. I just want to just pause just for a moment here. Even though we're in that rectangle, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we can't over-police. And so I don't want people inside of that rectangle to all of a sudden believe that every person inside of that rectangle will be pulled over. And so I just want to make sure that you understand that I've made it very clear that probable cause still has to exist. Probable cause must still exist for us to engage. And so we're looking for criminals. I want the crooks. There are a lot of good people that live in that area, and we certainly don't want to make their lives uncomfortable because folk believe that we're over-policing. And so we acknowledge that, and we have to be very, very careful. I expect for the good people in those neighborhoods, in fact, all over the city of St. Louis, I expect for our police officers to have positive encounters with the good people in our city and address the criminality in the way that it ought to be addressed, which means that your job is to find probable cause, arrest that person, turn that person over to the prosecutor, and then later to the judge. I think we better understand our job. They're not the police and the prosecutor and the judge. We made that very clear.
Judge, expound a little bit more on policing more equitably.
Policing more equitably means that we're going to put police officers in the places that they need to be. I don't necessarily like that phrase, hotspot policing. We need to put police officers in the area where they need to be. And so it means that we don't take police officers from other areas to the detriment of citizens in those areas. So if we have too many police officers in an area, then those officers ought to be moved to the area where we need policing. Right now, Dutchtown is problematic. We need to address that. But we don't need to over-police in Dutchtown. And so if there are areas that don't require 40 police officers, why do we have 40 police officers there?
One of the biggest issues that we've been dealing with for the past several years is police response time. When people call, and I'm clear that there's a priority on certain particular calls. I'm hoping that as you equitably redistribute resources, that response time could be dropped. And that leads me into a question about redistricting. It sounded like it was a good idea when it came because everything is about finances, everything's about money. Redistricting is going to, help us with some of our budget shortfalls. It's not going to cost us much, but it just doesn't seem to be working. Now, I'm not a police officer, but I'm just telling you from the statistics since redistricting, it doesn't seem to be working. Is that something that we're going to revisit? Maybe we need 9 districts. I don't know. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, sir. I can tell you that one of the in part of the analysis for how the 6 districts will be divided, there was a lot of emphasis on number of calls for service, but there was not a lot of emphasis on types of calls for service. So part of that lopsidedness is about the fact that if let's say the general number is 100, I think each district had 90 or so folks to give or take a margin of error. But my point is that, just as the judges mentioned, if 67% of the homicides happen in 2 districts, then that distribution based on strict calls for service, you're comparing. In other words, you're kind of comparing apples and oranges when you talk about the time it takes to do the assault first, the time it takes to do a homicide scene is not taken into consideration when that analysis was first done. And so part of the placing those extra resources inside of that rectangle is an attempt to offset that.
Okay, now I'm not going to take up too much more time. This might be my last question. I probably had about 20, but for the sake of the committee members, the PEER plan. Are you familiar with the PEER plan? Judge, are you familiar with the PEER plan? And so this redistribution of resources, is it taking into consideration the PEER plan, and what else, or how else can we complement the PEER plan?
Yeah, well, we had a meeting about the PEER plan just last week, and so again, the enforcement plan is a part of it. But we also talked about some of the social service agencies when you talk about prevention, intervention, those types of things. And so, hey, we have an intervention component of our department that's getting a lot that I'm going to add resources to. That's in Colonel Robinson's gang unit, and it kind of dovetails into the community engagement piece. And so the PEER plan is still in operation. And certainly the things that I would like to do fit well into it, as opposed to, like in other words, it's still a good idea. The PEER plans is still a good concept, and our enforcement piece fits well into it. And then of course we'll be working with the mayor's office insofar as some of the other aspects of it.
Yeah, and let me just add, in terms of intervention, we're certainly concerned with the mental health issues. We're concerned with the crime being a health care issue. So all of those things, we're trying to take into consideration to see if we can add that into this plan so that we have a more holistic type of plan so that we can address those things. And folk will often say that we can't arrest ourselves out of these problems. To some degree, that's true. I mean, the folk that need to be taken off the street, we ought to take them off the street. I don't think that anyone in the city of St. Louis or state of Missouri will profess that Judge Edwards is soft on crime. But at the same time, I understand that these people return back to our community, that they're reentries. Just as there has been mass incarceration, there is mass reentry. And so we have to address it in the same way, and we have to be just as concerned about mass reentry as we are about mass incarceration. So it requires all of these types of things. It requires that plan. It requires other interventions as well. So it's a great question. Thank you. You
certainly have my support to help you be successful, to help the city of St. Louis be safer. And Judge, I'm willing to help you find that $8 million because I'm not aware of this extra money that the aldermen have. I think I'm being cheated, so I want to find the money. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Alderman Vaccaro.
Sure. And I agree. I'm going to work to make things the best we can, but. And I probably
you have to speak up.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I do have, and I wasn't going to have any questions until you brought up the point that the $8 million. That does bother me because it's been out there. So this is a slush fund. Do you believe that only a small part of my neighborhood has the LED lights because we have to do it a little at a time by ward capital?
Well, Alderman, I don't
No.
want to take away your lights away from you.
No, well,
Trust me.
streets, trash, I'm talking, Your Honor.
I'm sorry.
Streets, dumpsters, sidewalks, all come out of that ward capital. I sit on the budget for the city. I know that a large amount, the largest amount of our budget in the city goes, almost half, goes to public safety. I know that there's probably better ways to do things, but I do take exception to that. The little bit of money that my ward gets to pave Hampton, that's why you got a patchwork of, drive down Hampton. Parts are paved, parts are not paved, because each ward is struggling to put money together to pave the streets. And I've heard that slush fund, and it really bothers me, and I take exception to it. And if you can find me some money to put back into my ward, I'd appreciate it, because again, we only have a small part of our ward which would help with crime that has LED lights, because we have to do a little at a time to get there. So I had no questions, but I do take exception to that. Even if it was tongue-in-cheek, I take exception to it.
So let me say initially, I'm sorry for cutting you off. For 25 years, when I talk, people listen, and people didn't cut me off or tell me to shut up. So with all due respect, Alderman Vaccaro, when I made that statement, that statement was made because it was invited from me, because there was a bill filed with respect to what the public safety director needed to do. And so, not taken very seriously, I certainly understand, been around here long enough to understand the process. And so I'm very sorry that you were offended by it, and I'll apologize to you if you were indeed offended about me asking for money to help us with public safety.
Well, I mean, so we're paying right now 3 chiefs. You know, I mean, if you want to go into a big debate about money, we have over $7 million that was put in the budget, far overtime. I agree. We're behind on officers. We're not doing things that, you know, rather than debate this out here, and I appreciate all that you're doing, and I'd rather do this in a more, your office or my office.
I certainly appreciate that. Listen, I've been around here a long time. I'm real serious about what I do. I don't play a lot of games with anybody. I say what I say, and I mean what I say. And so you have an opportunity at any given time to visit with me. My door is always open. In fact, you pick up the phone, you call me, I come to you. And so we don't have to worry about whether I'll have a conversation or whether I'll be direct with you. That's how I've always been. Nothing will change at this time. So I say that with all due respect, and I invite any of you to have a conversation with me.
And thank you. And just so you know, I have to leave because I have a meeting in the neighborhood at noon. So, so I just don't want to take anybody to offense me leaving, but that's what that's about.
Okay. Alderman Cone.
Thanks, John. Good morning, and thank you both for being here. Also want to, extend my thanks and gratitude to the both of you for, not only being here, but, being very thoughtful in how you're approaching public safety in the city of St. Louis. I've been around a few years myself at this juncture, and I've had the distinction of being able to work now, I believe, with four police chiefs, if you include the interim chief. And I have to say it's very refreshing to hear some of the things that you all are talking about. In terms of questions that I have, I'm going to try and follow the lead of my colleague from the 22nd and not ask the 20 that I want to, just to allow some of the other members of this committee to be able to ask them themselves if they wish. I think both of you know I represent a very large portion of the Dutchtown neighborhood. Kara Spencer, the alderwoman of the 20th ward, represents probably the other, 15 to 20% of the neighborhood. I'm very pleased to hear you all talk about, the 64, 67% of crime that happens, in that section of North St. Louis City. I have to, be very honest and very real. During the, civil unrest, if you want to call it that, the protests that were happening, having officers diverted from the, districts, particularly the 1st and 3rd districts that, patrol the Dutchtown and Gravois Park neighborhoods. I know what it takes to arrest 100+ people and to process them and the resources that are put into that. And I was absolutely flabbergasted that we were diverting those resources from neighborhoods that need them to address, something that, while of interest to the, general public, I'm sure, at that point in time, we had gone weeks without any kind of, property damage or anything like that. Meanwhile, I had a group of 5 young people who were literally jumping from car to car, causing thousands of dollars worth of property damage in the neighborhood, and we could barely get, I believe the captain of the 1st district at the time told me that he had 1 investigator that was left in the district that was actually handling this. We had video, it ended up being aired 3 different times on the news over a period of 3 weeks. I'm a little parched at the moment, but thank you. Half of a detective basically dedicated to thousands of dollars worth of property damage just does not seem equitable, to use, your terminology. My concern, and I think, the alderman from the 22nd ward brought this up, with the redistricting, when we went through that process, I was very supportive of it. I continue to be supportive of it, but there were things that we were told that were going to happen as a result of that the opposite happened. For instance, there was going to be a reduction in the number of white shirt, officers, that because of the concentration of districts that we would have fewer captains and fewer lieutenants. And, I think we actually probably have more captains than we had before. We certainly, we then also created the major position again. And so, we have more white shirts, it seems, than we had before redistricting. We were told that that was, going to be the reverse, the opposite. And certainly if we need that in our span of control, that makes sense, but no one has come back to me or this committee to explain why we have more, supervisory level officers than before redistricting. The other thing with the redistricting that, I mentioned this, when Chief Dodson was around, the 1st and the 3rd district were split right between Grand and Merrimack. And if you look at the crime that happens in Dutchtown, Grand and Keokuk, Grand and Alberta are 2, intersections that are of significant criminal activity, prostitution, drug dealing. I think we've had 2 homicides there this year already. It's 2018. Last year I believe there were 3. And I'll be honest, I have residents, neighbors who will tell me that they call the police about activity that's taking place on Grand, and literally, and I've told this to previous police chiefs, the people will walk across the street. And I've had conversations, and I know the alderwoman from the 20th has as well. Captain Dace and Captain Miller, work very well with one another, and particularly when there are flare-ups, they've been able to kind of, make sure that patrols are crossing boundaries over there. It's very frustrating that that has to be a circumstance that happens on a special occasion when there is a homicide. And I hate to call that maybe there's a different term for that, but the collaboration between the districts is really important. And also, my fear, and I've communicated this previously, is with the 1st and 3rd being split between Dutchtown, the theory that was explained to me by Chief Dodson was that there would in fact actually be more resources available to the Dutchtown and Gravois Park neighborhoods as a result of that split, because you could take the resources from the third and you could take the resources from the first, and then you could concentrate them, into that neighborhood. And I have found the exact opposite to be true. The first district includes, neighborhoods like Princeton Heights, which don't, they don't have high levels of crime, violent crime at least, but if there's a rash of car break-ins in Princeton Heights, all of a sudden we had resources that are diverted from Dutchtown to go take care of car break-ins, and they're not preventing the car break-ins. The car break-ins already happen. They're just stepping up patrols over there, and meanwhile I have prostitutes and drug dealers and murderers that are running around on the streets, in the eastern half of the district. And similarly, the third district has places like Soulard, Lafayette Square, downtown, and resources will get diverted to those areas very quickly. And it takes officers off the street. And so I'm saying all that because I'm hearing what you're saying, and it sounds really good. But I hope that there's an emphasis on that 37% of violent crime that's happening down in Southeast City.
Alderman Mayor, I agree with everything that you said. No one should have been diverted from Dutchtown to go and stand on a protest line. I agree with you 100%. If there is an issue in your ward, then that has to be policed as well. That's what I call equitable policing. Also, there's no dividing line in policing in my mind. And so if we have a police officer across the street in the first district and something is happening in the second district, and if that police officer does not respond, in my mind, that's malfeasance and nonfeasance. That's a problem for me. And so being a cop is being a cop, irrespective of where you are. Being a cop is being a cop 24 hours a day. And so if there is not a response, then that's something that we have to address. And so you haven't said anything that I disagree with you on. We owe the citizens in your community an obligation. We have to address that prostitution issue on Grand and on Jefferson and wherever it is. That's that low-level policing that I was talking about. Unless we address that low-level policing, we will have a lawless community. Mm-hmm. So I think that we're on the same mindset with respect to your concerns.
And so I very much appreciate that. And I will also mention, when I first became alderman, Joe Spees was the captain, the commander of the 1st District at the time. He and I worked together on a program that was funded through the JAG grant funds. And it was a youth intervention program. And, it actually worked very, very well. And I've had conversations with every chief since we started that program. I think actually ISOM was the chief at the time when we started that program. But we had one program officer that was stationed in the 1st District who basically worked with, roughly 100 young people that were known to the police. I mean, we talk as though, sometimes, young people in particular, I have roughly 5,000 young people that live in my ward. 90% of them, probably even more, are really good young people, and they want to go to school and they want to get an education and they want to come home to their families at night. There's 5 to 10% that are lost in life and need help, and that program officer was working with that 5%, and making sure, like following up with them to see if they went to school that day, following up in their home environments to, make sure that, their parents are, able to fulfill their obligations as well. If there was a truancy situation, calling, SLPS has their own police that they, have truancy officers and whatnot. Helping them get jobs, connecting them with resources resources. You know, we have these summer employment programs now. It was a wonderful tool, you know, within the department to have that, you know, program officer there to be able to work with those young people. Crime went down.
Hear you loud and clear. Maybe we can talk offline on that.
I would be,
because that's
absolutely.
Something that I'm very interested in. Absolutely.
I just, I would love to see more programs like that in the department where, you know, we're intervening in a positive manner in our communities, because I really do believe that that can have a really tremendous impact, you know, in the city as a whole. I'm happy to hear that you all are talking about kind of that quality of life element as well. I think all of us as aldermen, you know, we obviously live in the city, we live in our wards, well, hopefully most of us do, but you know, we get those phone calls, and it's very difficult to explain to people that police can't pull over people speeding down their streets. It's very difficult to explain to people that the police can't tow cars that are, you know, derelict and you know, abandoned in their neighborhoods. And it's frustrating for me as a citizen, you know, to know, you know, that there's stretches of our city that are just used for drag racing. And, you know, to the judge's point earlier, we know, and I think most of our neighbors know, that, you know, the folks that are involved in those types of activities are generally probably doing other things, you know. And so I think when your citizens, when our neighbors know that these types of minor things can grab attention and, you know, hopefully, you know, lead to apprehension of, you know, folks that are actually, you know, perpetrating violent crime or home burglaries or, you know, car break-ins and things of that nature, why aren't we doing more of it, you know? And I brought that up with, you know, Chief Donson a while back ago, and he's like, you know, basically threw it back in my face saying that, you know, we're not trying to generate revenue through policing, and that's not what I'm talking about. You know, I'm talking about quality of life. I mean, it's a huge issue, you know, when you have a nuisance property next door. You know, why aren't we, you know, and Judge, this is a question that I have for you about the building division as well, because that's underneath your purview as Director of Public Safety. But why isn't there more collaboration between city departments like the building division and the police department? You know, the nuisance problem property process, I think, works, but it certainly could be a heck of a lot better. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are with regard to that.
I don't know, I've never seen any of you present, but we have a city stat that addresses all of these issues with all of the departments in the room. City stat occurs right after CompStat, right after we talk about policing in the city. And certainly if any of you are at all interested, I'll certainly like to invite you to participate or to watch how we proceed in city stat to get a better understanding of how we can utilize the building inspector, the excise tax director, how we utilize streets to make these life issues better for our citizens. So I certainly will invite all of you, let you know about that. We'll certainly invite you to CompStat so you have a better understanding of how we are addressing policing together and how we are addressing quality of life issues together. So I would love to have all of you to come and to observe, to have, I think it will lend a better understanding of how aggressive we become in terms of these types of issues.
I would love to go to one of those meetings for sure. I've been to a few CompStat meetings and during my tenure, but certainly with new leadership, you know, would appreciate attending them again. Which actually leads me to another, I guess, question. We have had several commitments previously from other chiefs and commanders that there would be more open communication with aldermen, particularly as it pertains to violent crime in our neighborhoods. And I don't think it's ever been an expectation of aldermen that we get a phone call to come visit a crime scene. But certainly after a homicide has happened in one of our wards or neighborhoods, like, actually getting information from the police about, what had happened would be exceptionally helpful for us when dealing with our constituents.
Well, I think we're going to have some constraints there, but certainly there's some information that we will be able to provide to you. For example, for every shooting in the city of St. Louis, I get a text. For every homicide in the city of St. Louis, I get information. Of course, if there's a police officer involved, I actually go to the scene myself. But there will be some law enforcement constraints in terms of giving out too much information. But certainly, if you're interested in the information in your ward, we'll figure out a way to try to get it to you.
I don't think any one of us expects, name, dates, social security numbers, or any type of information that would jeopardize a criminal investigation or anything like that. But I think after a homicide occurs in any part of the city, obviously as representatives of that neighborhood, we get phone calls, we get the text messages, we get the emails. What is this? Why is this happening? I had a situation not just a few weeks ago where I had 3 homicides basically back to back on South Spring. And they were all unrelated, but I actually happened to be at the scene for 2 of them because I was just driving around the neighborhood. But I never got a phone call from a commander or a detective or anyone, frankly, and I have to make that phone call.
Let me offer this. Let me offer this. If you're interested in anything with respect to crime in the city of St. Louis, if you would give me a call. If you will give me a call, and I'll provide you with as much data as I can provide you with. In fact, I might be giving you too much.
It would be helpful if it was more proactive. I don't like to be caught off guard by a murder. If there's a murder that took place, I'd rather not find out about it through the news the next morning.
Exactly. And I have a perfect example because I know Alderwoman Pam Boyd was in mine, and so that works best with the relationship with the captain.
Absolutely.
And so there was open dialogue between her and Captain Boxtruck about a murder that would happen in Walnut Park, east to west.
Right.
So certainly what you're asking for is very doable and very possible.
The other thing with respect to communication from the department, I used to get, I think you guys call it a joker. And, it didn't have sensitive information on it, but it was just a detailed report of the activity that took place in the neighborhood.
Sure.
And I think that is helpful as well, just to know.
Some of that, though, is a little sensitive, so in some ways that might have to be redacted in some type of way.
Well, I think it was redacted when it was sent to me, so because it didn't have any, but it would list, basically, address and crime.
Right. I think again that the best way to work those out is for each, because you may want more than what Alderman Muhammad might want. I think the key is to work that out with the captains about what
we'll have the captains to reach out to you.
I guess my situation, because I'm split between 2 districts,
and that's fine.
I'd rather get one report for the neighborhood or for the ward.
I think it's just a matter of what your expectations are, and then what the captain understands about what you need and timing of it. Because obviously you have to. I can certainly
go on for hours, as I'm sure everyone can. So I'm going to kind of reclaim my time. No, I'm kidding. But I'll let the other aldermen ask questions, and I'll follow back up with both of you to meet individually. Thank you.
We're going to allow Alderwoman Spencer. She has to leave for a moment, so we'd let her ask her one question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here today. Thank you, Commissioner.
Speak up a little bit.
Thank you, Commissioner, and our new Director, Judge. I'm really encouraged by your both long and consistent track records of compassion and effectiveness, and I look forward to working with you and helping in any way I can. As you know, I represent the Gravely Park and Dutchtown neighborhoods, both very challenged neighborhoods on the south side. I'm encouraged by our reduction in crime in the most violent parts of the 3rd District, which I think is a very good sign of allocating resources where they are needed most. I'm also encouraged by looking at the quality of life issues, the TIM tags, and other things of that nature. I'd like to add a couple of things really quickly. It was touched on by the alderman from the 25th Ward, but coordination between city departments, the building division, our citizen service bureau, that coordination with the nuisance properties. So many of our residents are living, they know where the drug dealers are on their blocks, and it's about connecting with them and coordinating with them. Something else that wasn't mentioned, a camera policy, having our police department help the city direct an effective policy on where those cameras most effectively can be placed, to be placed in areas that need them most. Something else that wasn't mentioned is our 911 operators. It's very often and unfortunate when somebody in need is calling 911 and receives a busy signal. This is a very important breakdown of trust from our citizens to communicating with our police department, and I'd like to take a look at how we can address that to make sure that anytime a citizen calls 911, you get through. Neighborhood accountability, having our officers kind of accountable to our neighborhoods, and services to victims. It's so often that following a homicide or a shooting, those folks that have been witnesses, it's happened in their front yard or their backyard or their alley, are left with quite frankly, a mess to clean up, and they have very little resources to deal with this. And this really kind of helps, it does sort of weigh in on that breakdown of being able to trust. The only question I have, you mentioned legislation to be able to kind of contribute to some of those funding, specifically as it relates to corrections. I presume you're talking about state legislation as opposed to legislation that this body can effectuate here, because it is an issue of the state. Am I right? Or was I misunderstanding that?
And support for state legislation, especially on the correction side. And so whatever support that we can get from this body would be helpful. And I would certainly appreciate your efforts in that area. But let me just say that we support victims of crime advocacy. I'm obviously very interested in that, and I understand your concern about that. I can tell you that I'm taken aback a little bit about your comment with respect to a busy signal with 911. And so that's something that we'll certainly address and try to get a better understanding of how that could possibly happen.
Thank you so much, and that's all I have. Thank you so much for letting me jump in.
Okay, thank you. We'll now go to Alderman Arnowitz. I remind all the committee members that the PA system is not working, so we do need to speak up. Alderman Arnowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It doesn't work. But they say speak into it, so it records. It's a pleasure to meet Director Jimmy Edwards, who I've known in his capacity as judge for probably 35 plus years, and Commissioner Hayden. Congratulations. Everyone I talk to hasn't had a bad word, unless they're just not telling me the truth. But anyway, we know you have a big task ahead of you, along with every other chief we've had in the police department. We know a lot of reasons because of crime. We know poverty is the #1 thing that drives crime. But people aren't going to sit there and tell me that poverty causes kids to kill each other. So to me, that's two different things. And I look forward to working with you. And I can say this, Mr. Edwards may have been the best choice in years as Director of Public Safety. I've seen him operate in the court system, and talk about someone that's fair and is always, especially when he ran drug courts, always willing to help kids, juveniles, to get them on the right track. And he succeeded a lot, and sometimes he didn't succeed, but that's the best he can do as a person. Commissioner, I got to get used to Commissioner. So Commissioner Hayden, you know, when the former Chief Dotson went to redistricting, I personally thought it was a bad idea, and I came out publicly and said that. And the reason I did was I ride a lot of districts, and you probably know that. When 6th District had direct patrol up there, and I'd like to see that come back. I think direct patrol is very effective in districts. I know they're not answering radio calls, but they are out there, and you know they're involved in a lot of things that go on. I think that's very helpful. Policemen have a great memory of cars and stuff they're looking for. I've learned a lot up there. So hopefully we can get back, because one night there was a call. I was with the direct patrol, and it seemed like it took us 20 minutes to get there, and we're going with lights on. So I think response time is important everywhere. I think the police do a good job in general. So that's just a concern I have. I would like to see, when we get manned up and enough, maybe have direct patrol again up north. I think it's a very helpful tool. And I'm certainly not trying to tell you what to do. It's just my thoughts as a person that rides along. The good thing is I see a lot of things out there when I've done ride-alongs. You know, I've seen policemen baited out there. I've seen our kids talk to them when they're trying to have a conversation. And I see a lot of good people that talk to police. I think that tells you people want change everywhere. That is why you've seen Prop P pass in North St. Louis in every ward. I've ridden with policemen in the 4th District, and they stop and talk to, and they do know the people on their blocks, which is great, and they keep each other informed. It's not going to change overnight. We know that, but we can take the steps to do it. So that's one of my concerns about redistricting. Let's put police where they need to be. Let's don't, you know, redistrict and do it this way, because when we had 9 districts, response time was better, I think. And I know we were short of police. My big argument with the previous Chief Dotson was, I live in the 1st District. But I can tell you truthfully, on some Friday and Saturday and Sundays, we maybe only had 6 policemen in that whole district, because they were pulled for special events for the Central West End, you know, the Loop and all that. We shouldn't pull people from districts, because if there's a crisis, God forbid. So that's just a few things, and whatever I can do to help, I'm more than willing. I hope you don't take my status away, because I do like to ride once in a while. I've been to CompStat. Things I noticed about CompStat, we have regular, usually detectives or policemen that monitor those screens and everything. We have some policemen out on partial disability or can't get disability. They're experienced, been in the academy. Why can we not hire them to monitor those things and have the police on the streets? I mean, it's just a thought, because they would know it, and I mean, they would learn it quick. That's just another thing. But in general, I think we'll get police back. And we all know there's a lot of departments in this city that we can't fill jobs. So, you know, we need to move forward in this city, and time has come to raise residency for jobs. You know, police, fire, correction officers. You can't keep a tree trimmer in the city, because let's be honest, your best tree trimmers live in Jefferson County. They don't want to move here. And I'm just being honest as an employee of 35 years. But I think you'll do a good job. I know it's not going to happen overnight. It takes time with everything. But I will say this, we do have a lot of policemen in this department who are only here, not only here, but they care. You know, the biggest majority could move out. You could move out. You choose to stay here. But the biggest majority of policemen here are here because they care. So, and I wish you the best, and anything I can do, I'm more than glad to. And Director, I got the joke. If I find $8 million, I'd give it to you, but let me cut the budget, I'll find it.
I'm glad you got the joke.
But thank you.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, and of course you all for coming before us. I don't have that many questions. I think everybody has hit on it, but just specifically because we know what the issues are, we know what a lot of the problems are, but how do we be more proactive in addressing crimes? For instance, in my ward, I have the highest concentration of public housing, and oftentimes we deal with the demographic of people who are desensitized to violence, and they just simply aren't concerned about trying to help the situation. in any way at all. And I mean, we all know that poverty breeds crime, but how do you all tap into that younger population and just a community of people who know these issues exist, but themselves they don't particularly know how to fix it from a policing standpoint? How do you try to address that?
Yeah, let me just address it. Of course, you know, my school sits in your ward. Nobody's born a criminal. All of this behavior is learned behavior. Unfortunately, we've seen cycle of violence, cycle of ignorance. We've seen cycle of being undereducated. I think that if you are able to proactively get these youngsters into a positive environment, then you give them an opportunity to have some hope and then to have some success. Unfortunately, because of what they've seen and where they are and who they are, unfortunately, there is no hope. I believe education is certainly the key to giving those kids hope. There are three, in my mind, there are three pathways to delinquency. Your kid's going to jail, my kid's going to jail if three things exist in their life: a lack of adult supervision, too much idle time, and economic constraints. And if we're unable to eradicate any two of those in any order, that kid is more likely than not to end up in the system. And so we have to proactively address those things. Something as simple as recreation, something as simple as making sure that we can keep them in school and out of court. Addressing the school to prison pipeline. Those are all things that we can certainly do to address that population of our citizenry that you're concerned about. And so we understand what the issues are, but we have to be able to get in there and to be able to actively participate. Having our police officers, the Police Athletic Association League, is just one of those opportunities that kids will have to have some supervision and to be able to have something to do so they don't have the idle time. And so those are issues that we have to start to do at a very young age, not when they turn 11, 12, and 13. By the time they turn 11, 12, and 13, they're more sophisticated than any 28-year-old or 38-year-old. So we have to get involved at an earlier age, and we have to start to make sure that they have the opportunities. Because if they don't have opportunities, they will fail.
Thank you for your comment on that. And specifically in regards to community policing, what will that model look like for us? Because I remember growing up, the police officers that worked our neighborhood, they knew everybody. They could tell you which family was doing this, which family was doing that, or whatever. But now it seems that there's a disconnect. I mean, even myself, I've called the police before, and they'll drive by. They won't even get out the car, and that's the issue for many people in my community as well.
Yeah, so I think a lot of that, the source of a lot of that, of what you see is kind of when police departments for the past maybe 10 years have been so statistically driven, and so I think many departments have realized that getting back out of the car. Matter of fact, the judge went to all the roll calls throughout the department, went to all the roll calls and talked about getting out of the car, having personal contact with citizens again. And so it's really kind of a paradigm shift. And so we spent so much time studying trends and patterns, and it's now time to get out of the car, spend some time with the neighbors, to do a lot of non-enforcement. So when we talked about as much enforcement as we talk about non-enforcement, a lot of non-enforcement activities. A lot of getting back into schools and going to career day at Beaumont, or just having the principal call them to assembly and talk about some of the challenges that we've seen. And it goes back to, again, gaining their trust. The judge has mentioned a lot of times about that. When people think that we're just stat driven and all we care about is locking folk up, they tend to back away. And you'll recall several times on the news over the past year where people say that we're kind of soliciting neighbors to tell us what's going on here. You got 4 or 5 people shot here. And people are keeping their distance. And so being back in the neighborhood, being more personally engaged really causes that to heal that tension and to bring that gap closer together so that people will be cooperative more. So with more cooperation, that's kind of the role that the neighbors play. It's a lot of times no surprise to the neighbors when you get 3 or 4 guys shot at somewhere. They say, hey, well, they've been hanging out there, and we see them exchanging money for whatever it is they're doing. And so, hey, they're not surprised at all, you know what I'm saying? So, but getting back to having more personal dialogue with you all, and one thing I'm gonna, at the appropriate time, I really want you all to communicate with me as well as your captain, because I'm gonna be monitoring if Pam says that, if Alderman Boyd says that there's a lot of activity going on in Goodfellow and Lucille, we're going to be monitoring that more closely. Part of the CompStat now is going to include where do we stand in the 700 block of Auburn. You know what I'm saying? It's not just going to be just the same kind of talking to the conversation. Hey, we've been, you know, and I'll be able to keep that email trail. So I know that Alderman Kennedy mentioned that in March. Hey, where are we on that? And so I'm going to invite a lot more of that personal contact from you all, email to me, sharing with the captain, and monitoring those things that fester.
And so, Alderman, and just to add on, we get it. I get it. I had a parent to tell me that anytime a police officer had an encounter with one of her kids, she believed one or two things was about to happen. My child was going to lose his life, or he was going to jail. We have to change that. I understand that that's a trust gap. And I understand it's real. It's not talk. People believe that. Our job is to try to change that, to have a serious conversation. I expect the chief and every commander to come out of their offices, to get into these neighborhoods, go to these events, meet these children, and change. When I was a little boy, I wanted to be a police officer. Love police officers. Every time I saw a police officer, I ran to that police officer's car because I knew I was going to get a baseball card and some bubble gum. We have to somehow get back there. We get it.
Thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Honor, thanks for being here. Chief, thank you. I'm going to do less talking and more asking questions, if that's all right. I'm going to start with, well, either one of you can answer this. Judge Edwards, you mentioned you're down 124 officers. You've got 3 academy classes right now. How many officers are in those classes? Can you give us and I don't, if you don't have these stats available today, we can talk later. But
yeah, we have a total of 78 officers.
78 amongst the 3 classes?
Yes, in 3 classes. So we're averaging about 25.
Where do we want to be in terms of number of officers per class?
You know what, we're down 124, and I've said for the last few months that if I can have a class every other month with 25 to 40 students in a class, we would take them.
Okay.
We're losing officers by attrition. Our number is more than 124 down, because we have officers that are off on FMLA.
Right.
We have officers that can't return. So if we look at that number, and we don't, because we have to count those officers that are on sick leave and that are out. If we don't count those officers, we're actually down more than that. And so we can have an academy class every 60 days for the next year at 25, 40 folk, and I would be as happy as a lark. So if you know some folk that are interested in being a police officer in the city of St. Louis, they ought to contact us. Because we have openings.
Okay, so on that same line, I know there's been issues in the past, especially since local control, with just sort of the bureaucratic wranglings of when someone does want to be a police officer, the amount of time it's taking for someone to apply and get into an academy class. I know there's been issues with the police department and the personnel department. Can you guys speak to that and where we are with resolving some of those issues?
Well, I can speak to it on the police side. I mean, so it probably takes at a minimum 90 days to clear somebody, to go through the application process, and to be actually, you know, to do the background check and be accepted in the academy. Now, the other piece I can't speak to with respect to some of the challenges and you know the other issues that you mentioned. But so it takes 90 days from start to being able to apply to the academy and get into the academy.
Okay.
You know, one of the issues I'm concerned about wellness, mental health issues. You know, we have to address that. I mean, we have too many officers that are suffering from PTSD. Somehow we get them with these problems already in their backgrounds, and so we have to do a better job of vetting. And so time is important, and I understand that. So if we're able to have these classes somehow we're having graduations every other month, or having 2 or 3 graduations a quarter, that would be fantastic. So the timing in terms of getting into the academy, being vetted and being cleared, should not pose a significant problem in terms of growth.
Okay. Judge Edwards, you mentioned the multi-jurisdictional carjacking collaborative. Could you expand on that a little bit? I mean, just last night I had another troubling carjacking downtown at the Emos right there on 4th Street. It's a constant problem. I mean, I'm fortunate I represent neighborhoods that don't see a lot of homicides, but we see a lot of armed robberies and a lot of carjackings, and they're very concerning because there's very little members of the public can do, you know, if someone's going to run up on you and stick a gun in your head and take your car. So could you speak a little bit more about that collaborative and what's involved, who's involved, as best you can publicly?
Unfortunately, we are the victims of technology. And in order to steal a car these days, you have to have the key fob. And so in the old days, criminals would catch you asleep in the middle of the night, and they come and hotwire your car, and they're able to take your car. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. In order to steal a car, you have to have the key fob. And so a carjacking is nothing but a robbery, as you well know. You prosecuted in front of me for several years. It's nothing but a robbery. I shouldn't say nothing but, because it's a very serious robbery. Serious offense. It is indeed a robbery. So what we've done is we see kids that are coming out of North County. We see kids that are coming from East St. Louis. We see kids that are coming from Jefferson County. They all are engaged in these robberies of these vehicles. And so we always said that St. Louis City got a problem. Well, this stuff is not unique to St. Louis City. And so, in fact, many of the offenders of these crimes don't even live in the city of St. Louis. And so because of that, we can't be so arrogant about who's solving crime. I just want the crime solved. Right. And so that means that we need help from St. Louis County. We need help from East St. Louis. We need help from the federal government. This isn't about ownership of solving crime. It's about solving crime. And so this collaborative, for the first time, I think, and the folk that are involved in the collaborative really understand that this is a problem. As St. Louis goes, our community will go. If St. Louis City fails, then they will fail as well. And so it means that we all have to come together, and I'll make the ask. I make the ask to the feds. I make the ask to Chief Belmar in St. Louis County. And give you an example of this wonderful collaboration, the chief in St. Louis County has agreed to turn his shot spotter around so it's able to capture shootings up near the Delmar Loop, because his shot spotter was facing west. And so just to give us some help in the city of St. Louis, the State Highway Patrol on Highway 70, well, that's important. The U.S. Marshal going after folk that are wanted on city matters and on state matters, and willing to give us folk to help us with that, that's important. The fact that the U.S. Attorney Jeff Jensen has been a tremendous partner in terms of prosecuting felons in possession of weapons. See, we can't change what happened in Jefferson City with respect to our gun laws. We can't change that. We follow the law. But because those gun laws have had such a detrimental impact on the city of St. Louis, we need help.
And so I'm asking for that help, and much to my happiness, and with all due respect and gratitude to others, is happening.
Thank you. So along those lines, how can the alderman help? And I know you were half in jest when you talked about ward capital funds, and
I don't want to talk about that anymore.
No, but
I upset you guys.
No, you didn't upset me. Well, one of the things I know myself and many aldermen have spent considerable ward capital funds on. I mean, I spent over a third of my funds the 7th Ward's funds last fiscal year on cameras, on LPR, license plate readers, and pan-tilt zoom cameras. And, you know, it's about $100,000 to get really 2 pan-tilt zoom cameras and some LPRs associated with them. And it was an extremely painful process. Getting that designed. The police department, the Intel division was as helpful as they could be, but the process, the bureaucratic wranglings of dealing with the police department and the Board of Public Service and getting these funded and then up, I actually still don't have one of them up, and that has to do with the state of Missouri as well and MoDOT. But the process is awful. I mean, and I know you guys are new to this job and everything, but that's got to get addressed, because I think you've got aldermen who'd be willing to invest in technology and spend those funds, but that process has got to get streamlined. And you've got neighborhoods as well. You know, I'm fortunate enough, again, I spent $100-something thousand in taxpayers' money on this. The neighborhood then raised over $100,000 in private dollars to match it. And we can't, getting those systems to work together has been very difficult. I don't necessarily have the answer. Maybe it is utilizing a nonprofit where everybody can send the funds and go through there. But we've got to get this solved. And I think the aldermen are willing to expend funds on this, but not when it's 3 years later and you still don't have your cameras.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. You make a great point. Downtown, I feel real good about downtown. I was being interviewed, and somebody was telling me about no police officers being downtown, or not enough. But we have bicycle police officers downtown. We have cameras downtown. We have police officers walking the beat downtown. And then I thought about a young lady on the 4,000 block of San Francisco who told me she had not seen a police car in 3 months. Mm-hmm. That's problematic for me. So I want cameras in North St. Louis, on West Florissant, and Goodfellow, and on Riverview. I want them on Dr. Martin Luther King. I want them on Cabanne. I want them on University City. I want them on St. Louis Avenue, because I want to know where the crooks are coming from. Right. I want to know when they leave their house and when they come back. So I agree. We need cameras. We need to streamline the process, and it has to happen. North St. Louis should be as safe as the Central West End. Yes. As safe as downtown St. Louis.
Agreed. Okay. And look, I'm willing to work with you guys. I know my neighborhoods are. Would be happy to share their experience in this last year and a half trying to get some of these cameras up. And I know there's frustrations elsewhere in government. It seems like something we could solve. We all know we need more cameras.
So there's another issue that we hadn't talked about, is that sometimes Ameren actually put up some new routing for electricity. So sometimes it's a little easier said than done. We could come up with and learn that you might need one, for example, at Newstead and Ashland. Yeah. And so, but the closest ground would be St. Louis Avenue, Newstead, which really doesn't get a chance to see what people are complaining about. Right. And sometimes that can add some time to it as well.
Yeah. Obviously we've got issues with interiors of neighborhoods, that aren't on the major right-of-ways, where there's no fiber, where there's less electricity available. That's a whole separate issue than just when you've got fiber and electricity, and everybody knows there needs to be a camera somewhere, and 2 years later it's still not up. That's the problem. And I'm not saying that's all the police department's fault. There's other city departments involved in this process, but that's something that's just frustrating, and I know we can work through. Okay, I'm almost done here. We've talked a lot about districts this morning and some frustration with the districts. And I know you've obviously heard that criticism of some of these districts. What I haven't heard and what I'm hoping to hear is, are you guys willing to just at least look at these districts and examine them? I don't know if that's being done or if you're planning on doing that, but examine these districts as they exist currently. And, you know, we're now 4 years into these things, I think, and say, hey, maybe this one's not working. Maybe we need to change these lines. Maybe we need to add one. Will you guys, can I get a commitment from you guys that we're going to look at these districts?
Absolutely. And we've looked at them a couple different times, even when Chief Dotson was still here, about should we add some blocks to this one to make it more, you know, to make, you know, to cover, have it more equitable. Should we move the line from, you know, and I'm saying line because really it's an imaginary line.
Yeah, it's a fictitious line.
Should we expand the district a few blocks over to include all of the Greaterville as opposed to half of it? And those kind of things that make more sense.
Yep.
And so absolutely we will look at that.
Great. That's our responsibility. I mean, if we fail to do that, then we shouldn't be sitting in the positions that we're sitting in. We will look at what makes sense. We will look at what is beneficial, and in terms of being able to move things, being able to adjust things. Nothing is in stone at this point. And so I appreciate you suggesting that. I appreciate all of the aldermen that have talked about this district issue.
Yeah.
And obviously, it is an issue.
It's an issue.
And so we will absolutely consider it.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate your service. I look forward to having you down to some neighborhood meetings, and I'll be respectful of my colleagues' time, so I'm done.
Thank you. Alderman Muhammad.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner and Director. Thank you, Commissioner and Director, for coming. And again, congratulations to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, sir.
You guys can't hear me?
No, there's no mics. You got to talk loud.
Well, maybe you guys should come closer. I feel like you're so far away. No. Thank you for coming again, Commissioner. So I have a few questions, and my first question is about Natural Bridge.
Okay.
We all know about the numerous fatalities that take place on Natural Bridge, resulting in death and serious injury. In fact, since I was sworn in, we have had, and you already know this, Commissioner, you was the mayor of this district for a number of years. We have had 13 deaths since April of last year. So, and I know that you have increased patrols on the Natural Bridge corridor, and as of lately, I have seen that patrols and traffic presence has decreased.
Yes, sir.
And maybe that's because we're seeing decrease in car incidents and fatalities along Natural Bridge. But I want to know, is there a serious, comprehensive plan set in place to make sure Natural Bridge remains a safe corridor?
Let me just answer that question. We have a meeting with respect to Natural Bridge. It's either this week or next week with the state, with the city, to try to determine engineering, how we can just make a change and how the engineers get involved and others get involved to maybe slow some of those fatalities down. In fact, we know that there are more fatalities on Natural Bridge between Grand and Goodfellow than any other stretch in the city of St. Louis. So that is absolutely on my radar. We're talking about it. We're trying to determine what we need to do up there over and above putting more officers on Natural Bridge to slow some of that traffic down. But it's basically pedestrians that are losing their life at an ungodly number on Natural Bridge. So it's one of those things that are that is already on the radar.
Awesome. And my next question is, when we look back to the Jason Stockley verdict, and we look back to how police responded with police, with the serious police response, and how it wasn't well perceived. And I know that, and I do believe that our city police department did a much better job in response than St. Louis County. I would definitely say that. But I want to know, is there a serious strategy set in place to respond to these type of incidents in the future if they may arise again?
Yes, sir. So one thing that already we started to do, so I've pulled a lot of the video from a lot of those skirmishes. And naturally it was protests all downtown, that type of thing. But there might have been 10 or 12 specific skirmish lines that we are addressing. So starting with the commanders, like I said, with my first series of those meetings, and we'll have several about our response. We'll be tomorrow after CompStat. We'll do that. We'll sit the commanders. But after I do that, I also want to reach out to some of the protest leaders and do the same thing, because I think that if I'm going by what I'm hearing across the megaphone, is that several of those nights the protesters felt that the police response was proper. You know, they felt that there were things that were working, like a protective bubble response, so to speak. And so it's very important to me that our response is much better, and it's going to start through some conversations. But first with my command staff, then with the community, and which will include the protesters themselves as to how we can do that better.
And Alderman, we recognize that protesters, our citizens, have a right to protest. That goes without saying. And so I expected our police officers to act in kind. It's difficult for me to tell our officers that they're not to respond a certain way when protesters cross the line themselves. So we all have some responsibility out on the protest line. Citizens have responsibilities and police officers have responsibilities. I expect these police officers to be more professional. They signed up for this. I expect for them to be more patient, have the ability to de-escalate as opposed to escalate. I understand that. But I also understand that they have a job to do. So if a protester is breaking the law, I expect for them to engage and to address that. So I don't want to send the wrong message. The message here is we understand that we have to be restrained and we have to be more professional. We have to be more patient. We have to follow the law. We understand that. But at the same time, folk that are out protesting have an obligation to the police officers. And that obligation is not respect. We're not asking that. We're just asking that you follow the law.
One last question. In fact, this was back when you were a lieutenant, when you were a district lieutenant. And I remember the relationship that the police department had with the community. I remember growing up, when I was in school, grade school and middle school, I remember seeing you come to my schools with pizza and hot dogs and ice cream and candy. And I thought that built a relationship with the community, that created an atmosphere where the community actually feels safe or actually feels secured by the police department. Is there a plan to start reinstituting and reestablishing these kind of programs that actually created that atmosphere?
Absolutely. One of the, and I talked to him just last week, one of the things that we'll start doing more often, and me personally, I know that, kind of while I'm, people are kind of interested in who I am, but no, I actually plan on going into many of the schools myself. And so, like I say, right now we do go into some schools. We're going to increase that program, and I spoke with Captain Johnson about that just the other day.
Okay. So that means next time you come to the Board of Aldermen, you'll have some pizza with you?
If you'd like, you and I can go get pizza afterward.
Absolutely. I got one last question.
Sure.
Can I have a uniform? I'm kidding.
And then we'll have to arrest you because you'll be impersonating a police officer.
Okay. Alderwoman Boyd.
Okay. Most of those questions have been answered. I know both of you gentlemen very well. Major Hayden, I don't have to ask you anything because you know what we're looking for.
Yes.
The 27th Ward does have a safety committee, so they will be contacting you. And Judge Jimmy Edwards, I mean, you all are doing great. You're starting off the gate on high speed, so I appreciate that. And so I look forward to working with you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That covers all the members of the committee. Alderwoman, did you have anything? You said no?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Alderwoman Davis, you had something?
No, I was saying I thought she would.
Okay. Alderwoman Davis.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So one of the things I want to say first is that the city of St. Louis has an opportunity now to do some things very different. You are the most experienced, knowledgeable, law-influenced public safety director we have had in 30 years. So I expect that we're going to be going places and getting things done. I guess my main concern is, and I have to start with those districts. In my ward, I have 3. So I deal with the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th.
Yes, ma'am.
That's a little challenging.
Okay.
And it's confusing for the residents as well. And I know that you all will figure all that out, so I'm okay. The other thing is, I think it's time for us to look at the 911 priority call system. We haven't done that in over 15 years. So it's time to look at that again and then educate the public.
Yes, ma'am.
So that people don't have to get angry about their customer service.
Yes, ma'am.
But that needs to be done as well. We need to do our part as far as helping you, because we have almost 6,000 employees in the city of St. Louis. Over half of them are involved in opportunities to be out with the public. So their building division, the neighborhood stabilization service, it goes on and on. These people are out here every day. So we need to start connecting the dots, bringing more accountability for their reporting responsibilities as well, and getting some things done to help us reduce crime and identify where we have problems in the city. So we want to help you with that as well. And I wanted to ask you, Commissioner Hayden, how do you feel about partnering with establishing more block units?
I think that's an excellent idea. That if they have more block units, and I know that there's been ebbs and flows over the years, but certainly kind of the baseline for community policing is the block units, and so I can't encourage those enough when folks get together, because a lot of times, particularly, we've experienced oftentimes where there might be a block that doesn't have that many residents on it. At least it's like they might have half vacancies and half not, and so that coordination between active residents is always going to be very helpful to the police department.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I just know the difference it made when I was growing up, and even I think we just kind of got away from it maybe the last 10 years. It hadn't been as strong as it used to be. But I've talked to the Urban League. I've talked to the mayor's office about it. I think it's something we really need to look at. Getting people involved and getting them involved with being educated on how to have self-help.
Yes, ma'am.
As well as how to report properly, because that's a key for you being able to do your job, is people knowing how to do that. My other question I wanted to ask you is, I look at the Lieutenant Perry Johnson.
Okay. He's a captain now. Yes, ma'am.
He's a captain now?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, my goodness. I didn't know that. Okay, wonderful. He should be a captain. Let me tell you something. The difference he has made in these communities is incredible. And he's thinking every day about something new.
Absolutely.
And so we want to support those efforts.
Absolutely.
I had some really bad kids in my summer camp 2 years ago. And he showed up with his crew, and he turned them all the way around. Now he's got 3 of them who want to be police officers. Right. And they're talking, they're 10 and 12. And they're like, we want to be like Lieutenant Johnson. So it makes a difference when they really get into the community, and he knows how to do it. So however we can help, and I think the corporate community should be helping us more to get those things done, because they know how to do it. So for me, all I've got to say is, you said all the right things today. You know we all have to work together. Anybody that thinks it's your job by yourself is delusional. You are not social workers. We didn't hire you to be social workers. We got to pick up a lot of the slack that's out here. We got to connect all the dots, the schools, the jails, everything. We have got to make a difference everywhere with everybody. And so that's all I want to do. Call on me. I will help you any way I can. You probably done heard the stories about me. I'm too busy sometimes, but I'm there to help the police. My community helps the police. And even though we have some of the highest poverty numbers in part of my ward, we also have the lowest crime. So there is no excuse. No excuse. Yes, so we want to really work together and get some things done. And Judge Edwards, the budget process, we got to work on it. You all need resources. There's just no doubt about it. You need resources, and we've got to do all we can do with the budget to make sure you get what you need.
Very kind. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it.
Well, that covers all the members of the committee. Alderman Gracia and Gunther had no questions. We certainly appreciate your being here. What we've heard from you today is encouraging. We hope you had the opportunity to get a feel of the concerns of at least members of the Public Safety Committee and some of the members of the Board of Aldermen in general. We know this is not going to be the first discussion. There's lots more, both publicly in committee hearings as well as one-on-one and in small groupings of all the people.
Let me say that I encourage this type of dialogue. We're certainly receptive to coming to the committee at any given time. The one thing that I've asked the chief to do is to always be available to the aldermen and to always be available to the public. I am always available, and so if you call my office, you don't need to wait to get an appointment. And you can do like Alderman Boyd, just show up. and I'm
both boys?
Both of them. I'm absolutely fine with that.
Okay,
thank you for the opportunity to speak to all of you. And again, hopefully we've said something that was encouraging. Hopefully we got some of it right today. The thing that I can assure you that we will work hard every single day to make our city safe, but more importantly, work hard so that our citizens actually believe that they're safe. That's important to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we do thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's good.
That completes our agenda for today. The Public Safety Committee meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.